Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 1 of the Choose UCalgary Podcast. My name is Marcus, and I am currently a business student at the university, and I'm also in the co-op program as part of the student recruitment team. For today's episode, I am joined by Jolene, who is the Assistant Registrar for Admissions, and she is here to speak on everything admissions related, such as the various programs we offer, the different types of application processes, and even some common admissions terminology you might hear. So with that said, thank you so much, Jolene, for joining us on the podcast today.
You bet. I'm happy to be here.
Perfect. So could you introduce yourself a little bit further for us?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the Assistant Registrar of Undergrad Admissions, which basically means I oversee the whole admission process from application all the way through to admit. So that's it.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. So we're just going to jump straight into the questions here. So how many different programs does the University of Calgary offer?
So we actually offer 250 combinations of degree program.
Awesome. That's definitely a lot of programs for students to choose from. So can students apply to more than one program? And how would accepting an offer look like for this?
You bet. So on the application for admission, when you're applying to undergrad studies here at UCalgary, you actually get the opportunity to apply to two different choices. So we always suggest that you make your first choice, that ideal program, dream program, whatever you are most excited about gaining admission to is first choice. Your second choice, we actually suggest to be a little bit strategic. So when I say strategic, on the Explore program website, you'll see all of the different program choices that we have here at UCalgary. And within each of them, you can find the admission requirements, including the anticipated admission average range. And so when you're thinking about applying to a second choice, we suggest that you apply to a program that is definitely something you're interested in and you would be excited about gaining admission to, but that has a little bit less competitive average than your first choice. And the reason we suggest that is because of how we evaluate students. So when we're evaluating students for admission, we will always look at your first choice program first. If you are not admissible to that program, perhaps because your grades are a little bit too low, we'll move on and we'll look at you for your second choice program. So if your second choice is, a little bit less competitive in terms of the average that's required, you're setting yourself up for an offer of admission, be it to the second choice, it's still an offer of admission and definitely is going to get you in the door in the fall.
Perfect. And just following up to that, if students get admitted to their second program, will they still be considered for their first choice?
You bet. So the way that it works is if students, they aren't admitted to their first choice and you get an offer to your second choice, accepting that second choice offer is going to have no negative impact on your ability to be looked at again for that first choice program. We will continue to look at your first choice program anytime we can throughout the cycle, which is usually, anytime there's new grades available, we'll do another evaluation to see if we can get you into that first choice. So absolutely accepting the second choice. We absolutely suggest that you do it if you want to come to the University of Calgary, and we will continue to look at you to see if we can give you an offer to that first choice.
Great, that sounds awesome. Definitely a lot of useful information there. So around how many undergraduate applications do we receive per year?
Per year, we receive over 40,000 applications.
That's definitely a ton of applications to get through. And following up on that, of those applicants, how many received an offer for their first choice?
Sure. So we don't actually know for 2022 just yet. We're still finalizing admission offers. But if we look at the historical data for fall 2021, it was just under 70% of students that got an offer to their first choice.
Awesome. It's great to see the majority of students getting into their first choice, which is definitely a great sign. So what are some key differences in the application process for students applying in Alberta versus outside of Alberta?
Sure. So students who are applying from within Alberta have a bit of an advantage just in terms of how we get your documents. So within Alberta, there's a provincial system that allows us to get your transcripts on your behalf. So it's kind of nice. You can just apply and then leave it up to us to get those transcripts when they are available. If you're applying from outside of Alberta, it will be your responsibility to arrange for your official transcripts to be sent to us from your Ministry of Education or your school.
Perfect. I'm sure we'll have a ton of listeners both in Alberta and outside of Alberta, so definitely some great information there. So, what are some key advantages to applying through early admissions?
So apply early. There is no disadvantage to applying early. The big two reasons why we always suggest students apply early is if you apply early and you get us your documents early, you'll be evaluated earlier. And, we absolutely try to admit all of the qualified students that we can or that we get, but often it's not possible and our programs do tend to fill up. So if you apply early, you get us your docs early, we can get you in and get you a seat earlier before those programs fill up. The other piece that we like to highlight, especially for our high school folks, is that apply early and you will have an opportunity to be considered for all of our scholarships. So there are some scholarships that have pretty early deadlines, and if you delay sending in your application, you might miss out on some of those opportunities.
Perfect. So applying earlier is definitely the way to go. Give students a lot more flexibility and options as well. So for any student out there listening, just be sure to apply as early as possible. So what are some fees students should know about before applying?
Sure. So there's two that come to mind right out of the gates. The first is the application fee. So it'll be different for our domestic students and international students, but that fee is required at the time of application. If you want to be reviewed for admission, you absolutely need to pay that application fee. And then the second is the admission deposit. So the admission deposit is only due if you are offered admission. So essentially it's our way of asking you to confirm your seat. So it's a $500 deposit. The deadline will be noted in your offer of admission letter. And that $500 goes directly towards your first term tuition.
Fantastic. And just following up to that, how would students actually go about paying some of those fees?
Sure. So the application fee can be paid right in the application by credit card. That's the easiest way to do it. And then the admission deposit would be done through the online student center, typically through online banking, or there's some different options in there as well, specifically for our international folks.
Perfect. That sounds great. So I understand that there are other pathway options for students who are not considered for admissions under the standard admission requirements. And some of these pathways include diverse qualifications, mature student admissions, or even the Indigenous admissions process. So can you speak to these a bit more in detail?
Sure, yeah. So, in general, these are all the different pathway options that really have been designed to support admission of students who might not meet our traditional admission requirements. And essentially, they give the student, students in different situations or from different backgrounds, the opportunity to share their story and highlight how their personal characteristics or their life experiences make them a competitive applicant for UCalgary.
Perfect. That sounds wonderful. There's some of these I didn't even know about myself, so definitely some great information there. So some students may be considering starting their post-secondary experience at a different or a local college and then applying to transfer to UCalgary. So is there anything important you think they should be aware of before pursuing this option?
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest piece, kind of first and foremost, is that you don't need to start your studies at the college level in order to then move to UCalgary. We absolutely admit students right out of high school based on their high school grades, so it certainly is an option to get started with us right away. The other thing that I would probably suggest is that if you want to get started at the college level, which some students do, and I love that, get your foot in the door in post-secondary and then consider moving over to the university after a year or two. I would just suggest understanding what that pathway is going to look like for you. So the few different things to kind of keep in mind is that as soon as you take any academic classes at the post-secondary level, it's going to change how we look at you for admission purposes. So there really isn't a way to like erase coursework once it's being completed. So if you do start at the college level, it is important to know that those courses and taking those courses is going to change how you're looked at for admission evaluation here at the University of Calgary. The second piece is understanding transfer credit. So at the U of C, we do grant transfer credit for eligible coursework and programs from different institutions in Canada and worldwide, really. But knowing how that transfer credit might be applied to your UCalgary program is an important piece to kind of consider. And then the other piece is scholarship implications. So there are certain scholarships at the U of C that are specific to high school students. So if you go to a college and you now become a transfer student, you might be missing out on some of those opportunities there. But I think in general, if you are considering starting at a college and then you want to move to the University of Calgary eventually, I would totally suggest making an appointment to come in and chat with us just to have a better understanding of what that's going to look like for you. Our recruitment team would be more than happy to chat and to help you understand all of the different moving parts so that you can have a really solid plan going forward.
Awesome. That's definitely some fantastic advice. And for any people looking to transfer to UCalgary, that's definitely some great information to unpack there. Keep up to date with us by following our social media platforms at choose.ucalgary on Instagram and University of Calgary Future Students on Facebook to stay updated on our latest content. Great. So are there any quotas that the university offers? Like, for example, are there certain spots we reserve for students in a particular province, such as Alberta, or even for Canadian applicants?
So the term quota is an interesting one, and the answer is no. At UCalgary, we aren't reserving spots for any particular student group or students coming from any specific locations, Alberta, Canada, any of those things. So really, here at UCalgary, we are looking to admit the most competitive applicants relative to the applicant pool, right? The applicant pool changes every year, and really what we are attempting to do with all of our processes is to admit the most competitive folks.
That's great to hear. Awesome. So what is Open Studies, and is this the program to choose if you don't know what program to necessarily apply to?
Open Studies. So Open Studies isn't actually even a program. It's considered a registration category. So it's a way that we can admit students to the institution so they can start taking university level coursework. But you can't graduate from Open Studies. There's no program or credential attached to it. And there's lots of different limitations and regulations within Open Studies as well. So the answer is no. This isn't the program that I would suggest applying to if you're not sure what you want to do or what you want to study. I think ultimately I would suggest, if you're not super sure what you want to be studying, we have some really awesome resources online to help you kind of narrow down your options and get a better sense of what sort of a degree program might be a good fit for you. So if you want to complete a program with us, I would highly recommend applying into some program to get yourself started. And once you're in a program, there's lots of amazing people on campus that are super happy to have the conversation about, how to make your degree tailored to your skill set and your interests and all of those things. So it's always possible to change your major or change your program after you gain admission. So it's certainly, it's not locked in stone or written in stone when you're admitted. There's lots of opportunities to change and customize and all of those fun things.
Wonderful. So could Open Studies be kind of looked at as a transition from high school to university, especially if you're beginning to take some of those university level classes?
Yeah, I guess you could consider it a bit of a transition year. Similar to starting at a college, though, if you take classes in open studies, because they are post-secondary, university level classes, it's going to change how we look at you for admission into a degree program. So for a lot of students, it might be a good way for you to kind of get your foot in the door and get started and get a feel for post-secondary coursework. But, it's also a good option to kind of just get started in an undergrad program and look at changing your major later. So
Definitely, that's great to hear. So can you expand on some university terminology, such as combined degrees, dual degrees, minors, and embedded certificates?
sure. So there's lots here, and as a follow-up, we do have some of this on our website. Maybe we can throw that link in the show notes in case students want to go ahead and read in case I'm not clear. But essentially, a combined degree, we'll start there. A combined degree is a program where you're actually completing the requirements for two separate degree programs. So at the end of the day, you'll walk away with two different credentials. These typically take a little bit longer, so more like 5 years to complete because there are additional requirements, and you end up with those two credentials. A double major is a little bit different. So in a double major, you're completing one credential, so one degree, but you are doing, studies in two different majors. So two different primary areas of study. And they're kind of just all within that one credential. Embedded certificates are kind of similar. They're completed as part of a degree program, and they really are, a certain set of classes around a certain theme that's acknowledged through the certificate. And minors are similar. They're, a secondary area of focus in a certain subject area or certain topic area as well.
Awesome, that's great. I tend to see a lot of students generally confused on the difference between combined degrees and dual degrees. So definitely some great information there. So can you edit your application after it has been submitted? For example, can you change the choice of what program you want to study after you have actually submitted the application?
You bet. So students can make all sorts of changes to their applications after submission. The caveat is that you can only make changes up until the application deadline. So the application deadline is March 1st, and you can pop back into your application to edit it or change your choices right up until that March 1st deadline.
Perfect. So it looks like students still have flexibility a little bit after they've submitted, which is great. And are there any tools or resources students can visit if they are unsure of what program they want to get into?
Yes. So there are a couple of different things, actually. So one of them is a website that we just launched relatively recently that should give students some really valuable resources and tools to help figure out what they want to study, and there's a number of resources that are there, including different advisors on campus and different online tools. So we will make sure to put that link in the show notes.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll make sure to include those in the episode notes for sure. And what advice would you give to students who doesn't receive an offer of admission but wishes to reapply?
The best advice I can give on this one is to come chat with us. So we have an awesome, admission and recruitment team here at UCalgary, and our folks are more than happy to sit down and chat with students to help them, understand the process and understand, what happened to the current application and what they can do moving forward to set themselves up for success moving into the next application cycle. So reach out, connect. There's a whole bunch of different ways for students to connect with us right now, and we would be more than happy to chat and help you create a game plan.
Awesome. That sounds great. Definitely a lot of resources there for students available. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jolene, for sharing all your knowledge on admissions. There's definitely a lot of valuable information here for students. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And I also just wanted to say a big thank you to our listeners who tuned in today. Everything we talked about in today's episode will be in the episode notes, so be sure to check those out. But for now, thank you again for listening and stay tuned for our next podcast episode.